Hello and welcome to Books Central Inside the Pages. I'm your host, Abbie, and today we're diving into the art of writing short stories. Our guest today is the wonderful Janice Strong, an acclaimed short story writer with multiple best-selling collections to her name. Janice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abbie. It's lovely to be here. I always enjoy talking about short stories. They're such a fascinating and rewarding form of writing.
Absolutely. Now, short stories often get compared to novels because, well, they're both forms of storytelling. But they're really quite different in terms of how you approach them, aren't they? Could you explain the main differences between the two?
They are very different, and that's what makes them so exciting. Writing a short story is like crafting a snapshot. You're capturing a moment, a feeling, or an idea in its essence. With a novel, you have the room to explore multiple plot lines, develop extensive backstories, and create complex character arcs. In contrast, short stories demand precision and focus. You need to hone in on a single conflict or moment of change and explore it deeply within a compact framework. It's about doing more with less, and that's what makes it such a unique challenge.
That's such a great way to describe it. Let's start with the basics. When you sit down to write a short story, how do you decide if an idea is suitable for the format? What makes a good idea for a short story rather than something that would work better as a novel?
For me, a short story idea usually starts with a moment or a question. It might be something that sparks my curiosity, like, what happens when two strangers share a train compartment during a snowstorm and one of them is hiding something? Or it might stem from a single emotion I want to explore, like guilt, fear, or unexpected joy. A good short story idea should feel self-contained. It has enough weight to engage the reader but doesn't require the kind of world building or complex plotting that a novel needs. I often think of it as zooming in, focusing on a smaller slice of life that's rich with meaning.
So, it's about finding the right scale for the story. You're looking for something that can fit into a snapshot rather than a full-length film, so to speak.
Exactly. If your idea feels like it's growing beyond a single conflict or moment, it might be better suited to a longer form. But if it's something you can explore in a tight, controlled way, it's perfect for a short story.
That's so helpful. Once you have an idea, the next big step is creating the characters who bring it to life. In novels, you have the luxury of time to flesh out your characters through detailed backstories, subplots, and development arcs. How do you approach character development in short stories when space is so limited?
With short stories, you don't have the room for long backstories or sprawling development arcs. Instead, you have to show who the character is through their actions, dialogue, and decisions. Every word counts, so you need to imply depth rather than explicitly stating it. For example, if a character nervously fiddles with their wedding ring, that small action tells the reader a lot. They're married, something about their relationship is on their mind, and they're feeling anxious. It's about layering those details subtly but effectively.
That's such a great example, showing rather than telling. It sounds like you're giving the reader just enough to piece the story together themselves.
Exactly. Readers are incredibly intuitive. They enjoy being part of the process, filling in the gaps and interpreting the nuances. You don't need to spell everything out. That's one of the joys of writing short stories. You can leave space for the reader to engage with the narrative on their own terms.
So, you've got your idea, and you've got your characters. What's the next step? Do you plan the story out in advance, or do you let it unfold as you write?
That really depends on the story and the writer. For me, I like to have a loose structure in mind: a beginning, a middle, and an end. But I don't map out every single detail. The beauty of a short story is that it gives you the freedom to experiment. Because it's a smaller commitment than a novel, you can take risks, play with different voices, and let the story surprise you.
That sounds liberating. So, do you ever find that the story takes you in a direction you weren't expecting?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes I start with one idea, and by the time I'm done, it's turned into something entirely different. That's one of the most exciting parts of writing. It's like discovering the story as you go.
One thing short stories are often praised for is their economy of language. Every word has to pull its weight. How do you approach writing in such a tight, precise way?
It's all about precision. In a short story, every sentence has to serve a purpose, whether it's advancing the plot, revealing character, or setting the mood. When I'm drafting, I try to write freely and let the ideas flow, but during the editing phase, I become ruthless. I cut anything that doesn't contribute directly to the story. It's like sculpting, you keep chipping away until only the essential remains.
That sounds challenging. Do you ever find it difficult to let go of sentences or ideas that you love but don't quite fit?
Oh, all the time. It can be painful to cut something you're proud of, but it's necessary. I keep a file where I save those darling sentences or ideas. Sometimes they find a home in another story. So, nothing is ever truly wasted.
Let's talk about endings. A great short story often leaves a strong impression, but it doesn't always tie everything up neatly. How do you craft an ending that feels satisfying without being too tidy?
A good ending doesn't have to resolve everything, but it should feel inevitable. It should be the natural conclusion to everything that's come before, even if it leaves some questions unanswered. Sometimes, it's about leaving the reader with a lingering image or a thought-provoking question. It's less about closure and more about resonance, making the story stay with the reader long after they've finished it.
I love that idea of resonance. It's amazing how a single moment or line at the end of a short story can stick with you for days.
Exactly. A well-crafted ending should leave the reader thinking, feeling, or even wanting to go back and read the story again with new insight.
This has been so insightful, Janice. Before we wrap up, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out with short stories?
Start small. Flash fiction stories under 1,000 words is a great way to practice the form. Read as many short stories as you can and pay attention to how they're constructed. Notice how the writer handles pacing, character, and endings. And most importantly, give yourself permission to experiment. Short stories are a fantastic playground for creativity.
That's such encouraging advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Janice. I know our listeners will have learned so much from this conversation.
Thank you, Abbie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And there you have it, listeners, a masterclass on short story writing from Janice Strong. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Join us next week on Book Central Inside the Pages for another exciting conversation. Until then, happy writing.